Welcome to the presentation. So we're going to talk tonight about individual education plans, the IPRC process, navigating the school system, and what life is like in the special ed world with COVID going on. So just to let you know, as Anna mentioned, we are videoing this. Just so it'll be there for information if you need to come back and visit it, and it'll be on our website. I am a fairly relaxed speaker, so if you have questions and you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat box or raise your hand, and Amna will moderate the questions for me. We do have members of our LDAH team here tonight, and I'd just like to thank them. We have Maureen Pangan is our president. She's up there. Maureen, give us a wave. We have Amna, who's our events coordinator, and we have Shauna Kelly, who runs our social skills and self-advocacy programs. So I'm going to get started, and I know there'll probably be lots of people joining us along the way, but I know that it is time is valuable. So I am actually going to see if I can present my screen. And I wanted to do it in PowerPoint today. So just to let you know, if you want to, you can change your screen so it's just on a spotlight, and that will get rid of all the people, and you will just have the main presentation. That's in a box at the top. It shows the active speaker and the presentation. So that's there if you want to. I have also put in some subtitles for anybody who may prefer that. As an organization that works with those with learning disabilities, we always want to try and make sure that our presentations are accessible as possible. So running through the Microsoft system, there are a lot of tools that we can use to support presentations that we do. So I'm going to get started. I will go through the agenda again. We're going to talk a little bit about what is a learning disability. Just recognizing that we are the Learning Disabilities Association of Halton Hamilton. In this new world of COVID, we can have visitors from a wide geographical region, but a lot of what I will be talking about relates specifically to the Halton and Hamilton school boards. There will be a lot of similarities with other school boards, but that is the background that we are coming from. We're going to talk a bit about what is advocacy and how do you advocate strongly for your child. Then we're going to get into how do you get support for your child. If you know your child is struggling, what is the process that you follow? And this is where the individual education plan comes in. We're going to talk about what the IPRC is and why we need it. And we're going to talk about what effect COVID is having on the special education system. I was at the Special Education Advisory Committee for the Halton District School Board last night, hearing all the up-to-date plans and having discussions about exactly what's happening in our education system right now, so I can give you as much information as I have. And we'll talk a bit about the end as what is the process if all of these things are not working for you and your child. So we're going to get started, and a very brief overview. I'm sure most of you know this, but I want to make sure that we have a good grounding in learning disabilities for anybody that is new to a diagnosis of a learning disability. So it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it impacts the brain. It is a structural disorder. It's not something that the child is going to grow out of. It is a permanent wiring of the brain that affects the ability to process verbal, non-verbal information, either take it in, retain it, manipulate it, or output information. The key thing that I would like you to take away, if you're not already familiar with this, is that to be diagnosed with a learning disability, a child must be of average to gifted intelligence. So we were looking at the top 50 percentile of intelligence. So we have students that are bright, but the way that we find that is generally they're underachieving academically in a way that is inconsistent with their intellectual ability. We know they're capable of more, they know they're capable of more, but unfortunately, the way that they are being taught and the way that they have learned to try and manage in the school system is using techniques that don't work for them, and so they underachieve. The other way that we can diagnose a learning disability is that the child may be doing okay. So for example, my daughter generally does okay. She's 85%, pretty good results, but homework is 4 hours a night. Okay, what may have been assigned for an hour is 4 hours. Weekends, we start on a Friday night and we finish on a Sunday night, getting homework done. And so it's not just that the child has to be failing, but that their disability is impacting their life significantly. They're having to put in huge amounts of effort in order to be successful. So it's either not being successful or only being successful with huge amounts of effort or support. So again, the key chart that if anybody takes away, every time I speak, this is the only chart that I want them to walk away with. If they only take one thing, it's that we are looking at children who are bright, from the average intelligence to gifted intelligence. These children are capable of learning if we know how to teach them. And so what we have to make sure is that the school system recognizes that they're bright and that the environment that they're in recognizes that they're bright, but they need to be taught differently to be successful. So it affects a wide variety of skills in the academic setting. I'm not going to go into all of this. I do a whole presentation on what learning disabilities are and go into this in a lot of detail. But really, it's their impact on almost every skill that the child needs academically in some format, depending on their specific learning disability. And as we say, when you've met a child with a learning disability, you've met one child with a learning disability. Okay, everybody is different. They may have multiple learning disabilities, they may only have one, it may be severe, not severe, it can be a whole range of different things, but it can affect their oral language, how they listen, speak, and understand and communicate. Reading affects 80% of students with a learning disability, commonly known obviously as dyslexia, but an inability to read, comprehend what they're reading, all comes under that. There's the area of written language, so anything related to taking their thoughts and putting it down on paper or in a computer and getting it out to somebody else. And then mathematics is another area that can be severely impacted by learning disabilities. And the reason is because so many different processes are taking place for each one of these skills that is going on at school. So very, very briefly, because as I said, this is not a presentation about learning disabilities, this is a presentation about IEPs. 7 main processing deficits. Phonological processing is involved in learning to read, is the ability to understand that there is a difference in sound between a b and a k, and that in order to read, you need to know that the letter is there to represent a sound. And if you can't hear that difference, and it's not because your hearing's impacted, but if your brain isn't processing that there's a difference in the sound, the letters mean nothing. They're just shapes on a piece of paper because they have no correlation to a sound. And this is why we find that students, we can detect this as early as kindergarten. If kids can't rhyme, they may have a phonological processing deficit and they probably need some kind of early intervention. Memory and attention are big processes that are involved in learning. ADHD is is very closely linked to learning disabilities. It's not a learning disability, but about 70% of students with a learning disability also have ADHD. So they're very, very closely linked. Processing speed is another deficit. Most of our children have a processing speed deficit. And again, when we cover all the different things that have to take place in order to learn something, if you have a problem in an area, it's totally understandable that it will take you longer to do that task. So students with a learning disability generally tend to need longer to do their work because they just need to process it, and that takes time. So language processing is more related to how a student would hear and communicate language verbally. So they may, it's not a hearing deficit, but they may, in their brain, the words that a person says to them may be misprocessed and it comes out as something else in the brain, which makes no sense to them. And the same when they're communicating outwards, they may know exactly what they want to say, but the brain reaches in and picks a different word, and what comes out to you is something that makes no sense. And so this is very challenging for students. Perceptual motor processing or visual motor processing, often known as the goofy child who falls off their chair, has no hand-eye coordination. You know, the rest of the class may think that they're just playing around, but it's actually because their brains, their visual processing sees one thing, tells their muscles to do something, and there's a mismatch. So where it tells them to sit down is not where the muscles work to make them sit down. So they sit on the edge of the chair and fall off. It's also very important in writing, the ability to coordinate what you are seeing on a page or a whiteboard, and to be able to turn that into a letter on a page. So this is often seen in handwriting. Visual spatial processing is a deficit where visual information makes very little sense. So my daughter suffers with this. She can be out in the world and really cannot map where she is, because the information she's got about where she is really doesn't tell her brain anything. And so with that often comes a lot of anxiety. But visual spatial processing is often used in a lot of other areas. So social skills. A lot of social interaction is nonverbal. It's all about facial expressions, body expressions, body cues. If you can't read those, you can have some struggles with social issues. Also in math and reading comprehension. When we read a story to ourselves, certainly I do, I picture it in my brain. But if you can't take that information and process it visually, it ends up being, reading comprehension ends up being very difficult for these students. And then finally, we have executive functioning. Higher order functioning for all students comes in later for all students, generally mature by the age of about 25. Teens don't have a lot of it, and so may engage in risky behaviors. Students with learning disabilities and or ADHD, the part of the front of the brain that is responsible for these functions is often smaller and is slower growing than in a non-LD or a child with LD or ADHD. So it's all down to the size of their brain, and it's just not matured enough yet. They may never get to full capacity. They may never have full executive functioning skills and being able to plan and organize their time and all those things that we expect kids to do. So this is one of the things that many students struggle with, so that'll often come into the accommodations and things that we help or we advised parents to look at. So that's a kind of very brief 10-minute overview of what learning disabilities are. I'm sure most of you know some of it, if not all of it, but I just wanted to remind you that we're dealing with brain issues. We're not dealing with a child that just doesn't want to learn. It's a brain issue that is making it impossible for them to process the information that we are delivering to them in the format that they are receiving it. And so in order to be successful, we need to teach them skills, how to learn, how to build a new pathway. Say, if you struggle to read, there are techniques that can be used to teach a child with dyslexia to learn to read. Requires very intensive skill instruction by skilled professionals, but it can be done. Other students may need compensatory strategies. So if you can't read, you may need to have somebody scribe for you, or you may need to have somebody read to you, or you may need to get audiobooks, a whole range of things that get around the problem. Means that you can be independent, you just do something differently. We also need to develop self-advocacy skills, because our students will, we believe and we hope, be independent at some point in their lives. And if they are not taught how to advocate for themselves when they go into employment or post-secondary education, as parents, we can't be there. So we need to teach them how to advocate for themselves and the fact that this is their right. And then, as I said, we need to put in appropriate accommodations to make sure that they are successful. So just very briefly want to talk about what advocacy is and a little bit about what it isn't. At the Learning Disabilities Association, we take a very collaborative approach towards advocacy. We advocate on behalf of our students. We sit on school board committees, we advocate in the community. The Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario advocates at the ministry and government level. And what advocacy is to make sure that the rights of others or yourself are being met. So making sure that other people are getting what they need to be successful. One of the important things is that you need to learn to advocate so that you can help your child learn how to advocate, because the easiest way for them to learn it is by modeling it. So if you know how to advocate successfully on their behalf, and they will see that, then they will learn that it's okay to ask, that it's normal, it's accepted, and it's their right. If they learn to be confrontational in advocacy, then sometimes that will backfire for them. So we try to teach in our strategies how to be a successful advocate. So I'm a parent of a child with a learning disability, and that's how I became involved in the organization. And as soon as I found out that my daughter had a learning disability, I was like, I don't know anything about this. I need to find out information. I need to teach myself about learning disabilities, and I need to find out what the processes are. So one of the things that we're saying is that you need to be proactive. Again, you need to teach your child to advocate for themselves. So from grade 6, they should be in IEP meetings. They should be there with you, speaking up for what works, what doesn't work. You need to get involved in the IPRC process, as we're going to discuss that later. IEPs, and come along to Special Education Advisory Committee meetings, get involved with our organization, find out all you can, because the more knowledge you have, the stronger you will be. One of the things, again, is to recognize that, and I think it's particularly important at this time in COVID, is to recognize that our teachers generally want to do the best that they can, okay? They may struggle with that, either because they lack skill or training, or they lack resources or time, or that they have too many children to deal with. There are a whole bunch of reasons of why that might not work the way we want it to work. But deep down, I truly believe that the majority of teachers want the best for our kids. And so the way that we can do that is by sharing all of our information with them about what works, what doesn't work. listen to their perspective, because they see a completely different side of our child when they're at school. But recognizing that as the parent, we know most about our children. So not letting them make assumptions, but allowing them to at least present the information of what they're seeing and what, with their expertise, they would recommend. It's a data point that you can use, just as you would Google, or you would talk to your doctor, or you would talk to your physician, your psychologist, or whoever. It's a data point. And you can use that when you pull that all together to determine what's right for your child. And ultimately, it kind of is your decision. So try and keep an open mind, let them at least tell you what they think the problem is, and how, and try and work together with them as to how you can overcome that for the needs of the student. Recognizing, like, this is a truly emotional process. You know, there's a wonderful YouTube video, why do I come out every IEP meeting crying? You know, it's just, that is it. It's what we do. We fight so hard, and sometimes it just is so emotional. But if we get too emotional, we can't hear what the other side is saying. So sometimes that's why we advocate as well, or we suggest that you sometimes take somebody with you who can just listen and help ground you when things get too emotional. So I'm just getting hot here. So one of your responsibilities at school, make sure that you're at parent-teacher conference meetings. And I'm sure the people here in our meeting today are very engaged parents, because you wouldn't be here otherwise. So it's participate, make sure that you feedback information again, what's working, what's not working. Go along to the IEP meetings, get copies, write up your comments on them. Don't just accept them, work with the team, get to know the certs and the classroom teachers. Obviously help your student at home, and try and help resolve any issues that the classroom teacher is seeing. I mean, I say they sometimes have 30 kids in there, and maybe our child is the one that's making life difficult for them right now. So what is there that we can do, or maybe suggest that might be an alternative approach that would make their life a little bit easier. As an example, I send a letter at the beginning of every school year outlining exactly what the issues are, exactly what works, and that I'm here. I am here and I will support them, but that I expect my child to get the support that they need. So that they know that I'm not going to let them walk all over me, but that I take this seriously, and I truly believe that helps. And also the other thing is, please make sure your child is at school as much as you can. I know that there are sometimes a lot of anxiety issues that come with learning disabilities, but it's difficult to advocate when we're not doing everything right, or by following the letter of the law. It gives ammunition, and so we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can on our side of the bargain to make sure that our children get what they need. So we're going to get now into the IEP process. And again, I don't know how many of the people here today, maybe you could put in the chat, how many people, let's do it the other way. How many people's children do not have an IEP? Perhaps I can see in the chat, or maybe Amna can tell me.
Yep, I will tell you.
So if you've not got an IEP, or your child does not have an IEP, or you do not know if you have an IEP.
So far 3 people have said that they do not have IEP yet.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through what the IEP is, what should be in it, and what your involvement is in the process. So we're going to start from the basis that all students have legal rights. A student with a learning disability has a right to full integration and participation in society, and society must accommodate people with disabilities up to a point of undue hardship. Really difficult to get out of that. Basically, our students need to be supported. The Education Act, there's a special PPM 8, which is about students with learning disabilities. And basically, we must have special education programs for all exceptional students. And one of the exceptionalities is students with learning disabilities. And just to clarify, to make everybody clear, students with learning disabilities is by far the largest proportion of students on IEPs in the school system. It's about 46% of all students on IEPs will have some either diagnosed or suspected learning disability. And when you add in ADHD, that takes it up to 56%. So over 50% of the kids in the school system relate to our kids, okay? Which is why our voice is so important. So I'm taking here then the mission statements from a couple of our local school boards. So Halton District, going to work in partnership with students, families, and the community to meet the educational needs of every student. And Halton Catholic, goal to ensure that all students achieve success. So those are the standards to which the school boards are holding themselves. And we have a duty, obligation, right to hold them to it too. And the way we do that is through the individualized education plan. So it's basically a plan that is designed around the unique strengths and needs of the child to ensure that they have everything that they need in place to be successful. Because as we said, these students are bright and they can be successful if we provide them with the supports that they need. So an individualized education plan is a written plan that supports their learning and achievement. It is a working document. It is not a legal document because it changes all the time. So it's always continually in draft mode. If you look at it, there's always got written at the top draft. It's never finalized. And it describes the strengths, needs, and all the services that are going to be provided. Okay. So how do you get one of these things? Well, you can get them in a couple of ways. First of all, the school could identify that there was a problem. So perhaps the school has come to you and said, gosh, little Johnny seems to be struggling. I really think we'd like to put some supports around him. We'd like to develop an individual education plan to give him some extra support. And that would happen through a parent and teacher meeting, and they may do some tests at school. There might be classroom tests, or there might be other tests that they're running. And generally you would go down the center of this chart and you would end up with what we call a school-based IEP or a non-identified IEP. There's lots of different terms for them, depending on which school board you're in, but a school-based IEP. The other way it can happen is that as a parent, we say, I think there's a problem. I'm seeing this struggle and I would like to get some supports for my child. Okay. Sometimes that is all that needs to be said and the school says, yes, okay, fine, let's get some supports in place and we'll develop a school-based IEP. Sometimes we need to have some assessments done to validate our viewpoint. They generally done privately. You could have a psych ed assessment done. It could be something, depending on what it is, it could be from a medical professional, if it's an ADHD diagnosis. And you take those documents in and the school looks at them, the teachers, the cert, the principal, and they look at them and they say, yes, you're right. We're going to develop some supports for your child and we're going to put them in our school-based IEP. Okay, and that is the main way that IEPs are done right now. about 60-something% of IEPs are school-based IEPs. And so what do we do? How do we get one of those? Well, first of all, it's really important that you share everything you know about your child, about their interests, their emotional needs, their education, everything, anybody that's involved with supporting them, what your goals are for your child, everything. It's kind of like brain dump. Give them as much information as possible in those meetings so that they understand where you're coming from. And make sure that the lines of communication are open, because, as I said, this is a draft document that is going to change all the time. Okay. It's really important that, as we said, as we build self-advocacy, we help the student understand what their learning style is. So some kids are great hands-on learners. Other children are auditory learners. They need to listen to something. Some are very visual. It's important that we help them understand that, because once they understand that, they can be better at advocating for themselves. Once we develop the IEP, it's really important that they know what is in that, because if they don't know what they're entitled to, the chances of them getting it is pretty slim, okay, because they don't know that they can ask for something. And so with all the will in the world, if a teacher has 6 children in the class, 10 children in the class on IEPs, they're going to forget. And so we really need children and parents to be continually saying, okay, I need you to do this. Could I just remind you this would be helpful? You know, again, I'm going to use my daughter as an example because it's just ways of giving an example. But I would do her homework. She's entitled to a scribe. They would send her home with her homework. And as she started to get fatigued, I would basically write at the end of the thing, I scribed this. Like, I'm not going to lie. I wrote it for her. It was all her ideas, but I wrote it for her because she's entitled to a scribe as per her IEP. So I wanted them to know that she's making use of her accommodations, that they are important. She does need them, and that I'm going to use them. And I hope that they get used in the classroom. So don't feel like if you have something where there's a specific accommodation in the IEP, use it at home and let the teacher know you're using it, because then they know whether it's working or not. Okay. So this is a very rough draft, or a very put together, because I couldn't find a copy on the internet, of an individual education plan from the Halton District School Board. So it starts off with the fact that it's got the student's name, their grade, what their exceptionality is. This child actually went through the IPRC. Then we have a list of all the assessment data. So anything that the student has ever had testing them would be on there. Every appointment goes kind of in there, so that they all have a good knowledge of how much support and how much reinforcement and data is there behind what's going on. Then comes the areas of strengths and needs. And a really important box is their interests. And this is one that I always get the student to help with, is to make sure that the interests are up to date, because it's an easy way for them to be involved in their IEP. To say, you know, is history still your interest? Is that what you're really interested in anymore? Or would you like to change it? And they can see that this document, they are involved in whether they can change it, okay? Then come the accommodations, and then any cases of either accommodations, modifications, or alternate curriculum. And I'm going to go through all of that. So these are some examples of what might be statements of strength. And in the school system, they try and keep the statements of strength balanced with the numbers of statements of need. Okay, so they don't want to have a situation. You may think, coming out of the psych ed report, that there is a massive list of stuff that your child needs help with. And you may be right. Okay. But that can be, as we're building the involvement of the child, that can be incredibly debilitating, disheartening for the child to see this huge length of needs and very few strengths. So the school boards and we would say is try and pick the key ones. Like, what do you want to focus on this year? What are the most important? Like, if you could fix 5 things, what would you fix? And put those in the statement of need. And then in the statement of strength, find 5 things that your child is good at and is proud of. So it could be, I say, it could be anything. Great sense of humor, loves to do Lego and build things, kind, great singer, anything. Okay, because it shows the child that they have strengths as well as weaknesses. And it also allows the teacher, as well as this, the strengths and their interests, to build learning around this to make sure that the child is more engaged. So the statements of strength are important. And then, as I said, the statement of need, try and keep it to about 5. And so it's the 5 most important things that you want them to focus on. So there may be lots of things you would love to have as different. Sometimes that's not who your child is, but these are the ones we want to focus on because we want to fix them, because these ones are going to make your child's life really difficult. So we get down the 5 most important things that we think that the school can help with. And then from there, they develop accommodations. And accommodations are activities, tools, strategies that can be put in place to make life more level for your student versus the rest of the class. And I just want to see, I'm just going to move on a couple of slides. There's something that is really important to know. And that is that for a child with a learning disability, we should always, always be looking at accommodations rather than modifications, unless every single accommodation listed by the ministry has been tried and has found not to work. Because our children are bright and they can learn. And accommodations don't alter the curriculum expectations. So if you have an accommodation, all that happens is you get support to be able to do the same work as your peers. Okay? If you have a modification, it changes the grade level expectation for that child. So it may be that the child you're in grade 5 and you said, well, we're gonna give them grade 4 math this year. They didn't do particularly well in grade 4. We'd like them to do again. We're gonna modify the curriculum and we're gonna give them grade 4 again. Okay. For a child with a learning disability, there is no reason why the child with the correct accommodations cannot do grade level work. Okay, they are bright to gifted intelligence. Modifications mean that the child will be behind their peers. And it takes a long time and a lot of effort to get back to their peers. And so if you have modifications made in the early years of school, and elementary school, by the time you get to high school, the child will not have the prerequisites necessary to do the courses that they may want to do. So a child with a learning disability should be able to do an academic course if they would like to do one. If we keep modifying the program, they will either be in applied or they may be in a life skills class. I mean, it's really going to affect what they can ultimately do. So because our children are bright, we are looking for accommodations. And accommodations, going back to this slide, is things that we can do to allow them to do exactly the same work as their peers. Doesn't mean they have to do the same quantity of it. Doesn't mean you have to do it in the same way. doesn't mean it needs to be the same project, but it is covering the same core curriculum material. So there is no reason, if you are learning about space, random example, but if your class is learning about space and the teacher has come up with the fact that I would like you to build a model of the solar system. Okay, one of the number of projects I've done over my time. If you've got a child who has no visual perception, really, who maybe has visual motor processing deficits, so can't handle materials like that, maybe struggles with abstract thinking, that could be really hard. Okay. All the teacher needs to know is whether the child understands the structure of the solar system, that there are however many planets there are, they go around the sun and they do this, this, and this. It may be that your child could do that as a speech, if they would prefer. They could do it as a video. They could write it. They could do it in any particular format. It makes no difference in determining whether the child understands the content of the material that is being taught. And that is what an accommodation is. An accommodation is recognizing that we are only altering how the information is taken in, processed, and how it's put out. So the child may need extra time to be able to process that information. Doesn't mean they're not going to get it. Doesn't mean they're not going to cover the same amount of material, but they just need a little bit extra time to do it. That is an accommodation. They may need to work in a quiet workspace because they get easily distracted. Doesn't mean they're doing any different work from anybody else. It's an accommodation. Some children struggle with, we said, executive functioning, planning, and they may need prompts. So, you know, a child that struggles to write will give you as few sentences as possible when you ask them to write a paragraph. It'll be as short as possible because it's a lot of work. And so having to write and think of ideas at the same time is a big strain on the brain. So asking a child questions about, well, what other things, what other planets are there in space when they've just written about Earth, is not telling them the answer. It's asking them to provide the remaining content. That is an accommodation, okay? We're giving them the opportunity to demonstrate what they know, and that is an accommodation. It is not a change. It is not unfair. We are just providing them with an opportunity to show what they know. Children may need the instructions repeated, and they may need assistive tech. If the child cannot read, and we are not teaching them how to read anymore because they've got past grade 3, and now we're all about learning, reading for learning material, then they need access to an assistive tech. They need, may need a text-to-speech, something that's going to read to them, because all that happens if we don't do that is we slow them down and we don't give them the opportunity to learn all the content. So that is an accommodation. So that would be in comparison to a modification, which is where we say, Johnny, you're really struggling. You really find this difficult. So we're not going to teach you all the elements of maths. We're only going to teach you 3 of them, of the strands of maths this year. We're going to put that down in your IEP, that we're only going to focus on 3 things because that's all we think you can handle. Okay, that is a modification because at some point, Johnny has to catch up with the other 2. Okay, and that has changed the expectation of the curriculum for him. And so that for us as a Learning Disabilities Association is not the route to take unless you've tried absolutely everything. Okay, then if there's a mental health issue or there's other things going on, perhaps modifications might be something to look at. But it needs to be something that's carefully considered before you move to a modification. And then finally, in your IEP, you may find at the end, there's something called alternative programs. And these are learning expectations, and they are not based on the curriculum. So they are not extra things that the teacher's going to do in the class regarding, giving them additional work or less work. These are either more, you might find them in a gifted student where they want to stretch them. You might find them regarding learning to use assistive technology, doing learning strategies, social skills. These are skills that are not clearly defined in the curriculum, but we feel that the child needs to learn. So an example would be that the student will develop strategies to ensure positive interactions with their peers 4 times out of 5. Okay. There is nothing in the curriculum about developing positive peer interactions. There's no check mark. The teachers taught that. This is something different that the CERT team has determined that your child needs to have to be successful going forward. So they're going to help them learn how to do social skills. And then, so they'll set a goal, and then there'll be a number of maybe 2 or 3 activities that they're going to try and encourage your child to do over the course of the term to help them get to the end of this goal by the end of the year. And that's what you'll see in alternative programs. Okay, alternative programming. If you see anything else there about modifications, about reduced curriculum, it shouldn't be there for a child with a learning disability. There should only be learning skills, assistive tech, social skills, those kind of things. So when all that is pulled together, you're going to, hopefully, you will have sat around a table with the CERT, with the classroom teacher, and you will have devised this all together. Okay, generally doesn't happen. What usually happens is the CERT goes away into their room, maybe talks to the classroom teacher, and they come up with a list of accommodations that they think is going to work, and then they send it to you, okay? And that's probably the first time you've seen it. And they're going to ask for your signature. The first thing you should know is the signature is only saying that you have received the IEP, not that you have agreed to the IEP. Okay, so you can sign it. And then you start marking it up. So I would go through it with a pen, scratch out what I don't like. I would write in other things. I'd change the interests. I'd go through it with my daughter or son and see what they want to have added. Do they need this anymore? Do they use their assistive tech like this? Is that how they want to use it? Because as they get older, their interest in doing certain things will change. They might be more influenced by their peers, so they need to buy into what they're being asked to do. And you can add comments. And then when I write it up, I send it back to the school, and now they have a document that I've signed off that I've received, but it's very clear that I have different thoughts and I have other thoughts. And generally then what happens is I might say, I'd like to have a meeting with you to discuss my comments, and they'll say yes, and or they'll just say, by the end of it, they'll get to the point, they'll say, we'll just make the changes. Okay. Because I've been in this process now for a long time. So they might say, okay, fine, yeah, we'll just make those changes, and then that will be the IEP. So it is a collaborative approach. I never want you to think that the IEP that you get is what your child has to have, okay? It is a draft document that you are not only allowed to, are expected to add comments to and add feedback to. That is your role in this process. When we talked about being involved in the process, your role is to say, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. Or have you tried this, because this really works at home. Those kind of things that the teacher just doesn't know. And those comments go in, and then the school has a document on their file that's covered with your notes. And that goes into their OSR. They will reissue one, which is now aligned with what you said. And then again, you can sign that off. And if you're happy, you don't have to add any more comments. And that goes into the file. Again, still as a draft document, because that will get changed at some point in time. And I want you to recognize that you can change that document. And I think it's within 30 days. You can change your document anytime within 30 days. So if you don't like it, if you don't think it's working, you can just say, I'd like to relook at the IEP, please. And they have to let you do that. Okay. So that is an IEP. Does anybody have any questions about IEPs before I move on to what the Identification, Placement and Review Committee is all about? So this is a school-based IEP. It's the same IEP you're going to get through this process, but there's a little bit more that comes with it. But an IEP should be the same regardless of the two processes. It should be exactly what your child needs to be successful. So does anybody have any questions? Perhaps, Amna, if you could let me know if there are any questions. If not, I'll carry on.
Yep, so far we don't seem to have any.
Okay.
I think we're good to move on.
Okay, great. So the IPRC. So we talked about the fact that the IEP is a working document. It can be changed at any time. So 30 days later, you can go in and you can say, I'd like to change that document. It can hardly be a contract that you can bind everybody to if everybody can keep going in and changing it. The only legal document that you have is the one that comes out of the Identification, Placement and Review Committee. Okay. And this generally happens when the child is struggling. We're going to follow a slightly different pathway, and you're going to end up with what they call an identified IEP or a formal IEP. There's, I say, different names for it. In order for this to happen, an assessment must have taken place, and the child must have been diagnosed with a learning disability or another exceptionality. Okay. So, but we're here to talk about learning disabilities. They must have had a diagnosis of a learning disability. Otherwise, you will not get an IPRC. Okay, you will not get an identified IEP. So basically what happens, either the school or you identify a problem, there's a whole bunch of tests go on, and then either the school can say from the SRT meeting, we would like to put your child through for identification under the IPRC. Or you can say, you can write to the principal, I would like to have my child go forward for identification under the IPRC. Okay, and if you have a formal diagnosis, they cannot deny you. And I learned that the hard way. I was denied twice until I became involved with the organization, realized that that really wasn't on, and finally got my child identified in grade 9, which has been a godsend with COVID, because now I know that everything has to be done. Okay, so I want to talk about what is the IPRC and what is it there for? So this is a committee. It's a group of 3 people that basically look at all the documentation and they decide if the student is exceptional. Okay, meaning they have a different need from the regular stream of children going through the school, and then they determine which exceptionality the child falls under, and then at the end they have to examine the strengths and needs of the pupil, and then at the end of that they determine what the placement for the child will be. Now, the placement can be anything, and I'm going to go through that, but generally I was talking to somebody today. When you go to an IPRC, there should be nothing there that is a surprise to you. Okay, you should be aware that yes, your child is going to be identified for a learning disability, a communication exceptionality. You are happy with the placement they are going to give your child. Okay, if you don't know what's going on or you're not happy with it, then you need to get back to the cert table. You need to find out what is going on, because you don't want to have you don't want to, this is not the place to argue about it, okay? So what comes out of this is that, I'll just jump, what comes out of it is that the IPRC will determine if the student is exceptional and what exceptionality is appropriate, okay? And there are a number of different categories they can put them in. So it could be a behavior category, okay? It could be physical. So there could be a physical disability for which the student needs some support. It could be a communication, so autistic, hearing impaired, language impaired, speech impaired, and this is where learning disabilities falls in. It could be intellectual, which is either giftedness, developmental delay, or a mild intellectual disability. Or it could be a multiple, a combination of several of these. So you could have an intellectual, you could have a child who's gifted and also autistic. Those kind of things would work. And this is what they do. They decide what category does the child fall into. And the only thing that they can look at is the reports that have come from the assessments. They are not psychologists. They have no legal standing. So yeah, I had a conversation with, I think it was a superintendent at one point, and I said, because they refused to put my daughter forward because she wasn't doing badly enough. And I said, I don't care. You know, we're spending hours at home. I want her diagnosed. I want her identified with a learning disability. And they said, well, you know, I don't think the committee will agree. And I said, are you telling me that 3 principals are going to sit there and tell me that the psych ed assessment, which defines that my child has a learning disability, is incorrect? At which point, obviously, they said no. And I said, in that case, you have to define that she has a learning disability and she fits into the criteria. Like, there is, once the assessment's there, it tells you on a piece of paper that the child has a learning disability. Okay, so they will define the category. So again, as I said, it shouldn't be a shock. Sometimes the shock can come if they put you with another category that you're not expecting, like a behavior one. I was talking with somebody about this morning, learning disability and behavior, which came as a shock. And so that may be a problem. But that's basically what they're going to do. They're going to agree that, yes, your child has a learning disability. Okay. And so in order to do that, as I've mentioned, we have to have a psych ed. If it's a medical assessment for a medical disorder or anything like that, it has to be done by a medical professional. The psych ed assessment has to be done by a member of the Ontario College of Psychologists. And obviously, it cannot be done without you or the student agreeing if they're over 16. Okay, so an IPRC can't take place without you. Basically, what is going to happen is you will go into this meeting and there will be 3 people sitting on the committee. And there will be the chair, who is usually a vice principal. There'll be a principal, not from your school, from another school. These are all from somewhere that you don't know. And there will be a superintendent or the designate of the superintendent. Okay, those three people are going to sit and decide if what they're seeing means that your child has an exceptionality. You should be attending. The principal of your school might, your CERT might, the classroom teacher might. You can bring along anybody that you need, okay, to help represent you. And so as a Learning Disabilities Association, we sometimes go to IPRC meetings to support clients who are having a difficulty or don't think that they're going to get what they want. Okay, so if, say if it hadn't been me going to advocate for my child on the 3rd time, I might have reached out to the Learning Disabilities and said, would you come and explain to them why my child needs to be diagnosed with an exceptionality of learning disability? So that's the kind of thing that we do. And they can't stop you. Okay, you can take somebody along, and you should take somebody along, because again, these things get emotional. So you may not be listening to what they're saying. You may not be hearing everything that's going on, and somebody needs to be, and somebody needs to be taking notes for you. Okay. So once they've decided what exceptionality is, they then determine the placement. And the majority of it is regular class with accommodations or modifications. Okay, so that's where most children with learning disabilities would be. As it gets more severe, then they would go further down the chart, and we would get more support. So it might be that the CERT is going in to support the classroom teacher and give them guidance on what to do. It could be that the child is being taken out for a certain amount of time each day, week, whatever is agreed, to give them extra learning. It could be a self-contained classroom, but part of the time they're in a regular classroom. Or it could be a fully self-contained classroom. And again, there are self-contained learning disabilities classes, which may have, I don't know, 8, 10 children in them who all have learning disabilities and are taught by hopefully somebody who is a specialist and can help them focus on building those skills. And then finally, there is always the option to go to the provincial schools, which are residential schools for children with severe learning disabilities. So that is always an option. So after you've gone through the IPRC, so now what's happened is they've said, yes, your child has a learning disability, and they're going to be in a regular classroom, and they're going to get some accommodations. Okay. And what happens then is that the principal has to complete an IEP within 30 days, and the normal process for an IEP takes place. The difference between this and the regular IEP is that if you have a psych ed assessment, you can force this, okay? If the school doesn't want to support the child, if you have a psych ed assessment that says there's a learning disability, you can do as I did, which is write to the principal and say, I would like an IPRC meeting, please, to identify my child. And they can't stop you, okay? And they have, I think it's 10 days to get your meeting date, okay? And then if they agree, if the committee agrees, then they have 30 days to get you an IEP. So if you're struggling to get an IEP and your child has a diagnosis of a learning disability, this is one approach you can take. The other thing is that this document that comes out, the statement of exceptionality, is the only legal document that you have, and it follows your child through the whole of their school career in the school board. So if you change schools, it will go with them. If you go, actually I think it's if you go anywhere in Ontario, it follows them. And that can be useful if, say you want to go into a different program, or maybe you're thinking in the future, I might need more supports, or so for my daughter, she wanted to do the International Baccalaureate program, the IB program. It's quite an intensive program, but I knew that she would need accommodations in order to do that. But it's also an international program, okay? So it's run by somebody in France. And so I thought the only way that I can absolutely guarantee that she will get her accommodations is if I get her identified. Because otherwise the school could turn around to me and say, oh, I'm sorry, in that program, you know, they don't have these rules and you can't do that. But once I have an IPRC statement, then the school legally has to provide those accommodations. So it's kind of, it's used if you're not getting what support you need. We would like it to be used more often, to be perfectly honest, because then we would understand exactly how many kids are in the system with learning disabilities. Kids who are on informal IEPs are often, they're just clumped into data that we receive, which is just other. So we don't really know, it makes it hard for us to advocate. But it follows the child, so you will know they will always have the supports, even if the principal changes, the school changes, legally they have to have those supports in place within 30 days. It might get you supports that you think you might need in the future. It will give you access to a class or additional supports that you might need. So if you think you might need a self-contained classroom at some point, you will not get into one unless you have an IPRC statement. They just won't let you in. So those are some of the reasons that people would go through an IPRC. So there are two processes to get an IEP. They all end up with an IEP. The accommodations on an IEP should be identical, regardless of the process, unless there's some kind of additional placement going on. But if you're in a regular classroom, the accommodations should be identical, because the accommodations should be designed to support the child and their unique strengths and needs. It really depends on how much legal weight you want as to whether you go through the IPRC. And that's what it comes down to, or whether you want access into some of those additional supports that may not be available to you without it. So we recommend that people go through IPRC, just so that you have it, so that you've got it there, but it is a choice. Okay, it is your right to be able to do it. You can write to your principal at any time, and he has to arrange one for you. But you have to have your paperwork in order. You have to have an assessment that shows you have a learning disability. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about IPRCs?
Yes, there is one question here pertaining to that. So it is from Louisa, and she's asking, who can you take with you to the IPRC meetings other than a rep from LDA?
You can take your psychologist. You can take your husband, your best friend. They can't stop you from having somebody there as your emotional support. Okay, they might not like it, but if you give them advance warning, you can take whoever you like. It could be, I wouldn't recommend taking in a lawyer, but you know, it's whoever gives you the confidence to advocate in the way that you need to advocate, or whoever you feel would advocate for you better. Okay, can go into that meeting. You just need to let them know. Okay, so does that answer the question?
Yes, she has acknowledged. And there is another question by Anna, who's asking, why not a lawyer? Is it too threatening?
Yeah, basically it's too threatening at this stage. I mean, if you don't get what you want at the IPRC, you can appeal it, and then you might want to bring in a lawyer. You know, if they're telling you that the legal documentation that you have, as long as it is done by a psychologist with the Ontario College of Psychologists, if they're telling you it's not enough, you might want to consider a lawyer or another advocate group, or your psychologist or whatever, because, you know, as I said, to me it seems impossible that a school panel can argue with the psychologist's findings, which are all statistically done and valid, and often the trouble can come with placements. So if the school is saying, we can't deal with this child in the school, and we are recommending that they go to a self-contained classroom, and you don't want that, then obviously those discussions can get tough. And then, you know, there may be a ruling that you don't like, in which case you might need to appeal it.
Thank you. There's one more question from Nicole, and she asks, our IPRC meeting was in the school with teacher, CERT team, and principal. Was this done correctly?
So there are two types of meetings. There is a principal, well, and some of them are changing. Okay, so let me give you that. The model is changing. So, so you're in Holton Catholic. Is that Nicole? Was it Nicole?
If you could let us know in the chat. Yes, she is.
Yes. So I attended one in Holton Catholic, and they have changed their model. And that was the principal. I think there was another principal, and there was the cert. And so I think they have changed their model, where they're doing more school-based IEPs, school-based IPRCs. I know that Holton District School Board is moving that way too, but I don't know with Holton District whether it will mean that the principal in the school is the one signing off, or whether they're still going to bring in those 3 people. They just happen to meet you at your school rather than you have to go to their school building. I don't know what's they have. It was just about to come in as COVID came, so I don't think they've done any of those. So for, yes, in the Holton Catholic Board, they have gone to some which are, and I think it's very much if they're non-confrontational, it would be, again, it's a rubber stamp. It's the principal, maybe a vice principal and cert team, and they're all basically signing off. Everybody's signing off saying, yep, we agree.
Great, thank you. Some more questions coming in. One from Shannon, who is asking, how do you progress in the meetings with the teacher and the cert if you feel they're not abiding by the accommodations?
Okay, so we'll move on to that, shall we? We'll go into that. I have a couple of slides about that, okay? But first of all, I wanted to go through what effect is COVID having, okay? And so really there should be no effect, okay? Under the ministry guidelines, all of our students with spec ed needs should be receiving the same support. The IEP and IPRC meetings should be taking place by video conferencing. So the IEP should be coming out very shortly. Again, so you should have a video meeting. If you want to have a video meeting to discuss what's in the IEP, you can request that. Otherwise, you're going to get the document and then you can just mark it up. So your child should have been given a cert. You should know who the cert is. One thing that we do know is that assessments for, if you're going with a school run assessment, there is obviously a backlog. I think there's, I don't know, 600 children waiting for psych ed assessments right now. And I don't believe, that really doesn't include the fact that no kids were put forward from March onwards to the end of the year. So it probably should be higher than that. However, okay, so that's the theory. It's tough. It's tough in the schools right now. The school system, as I understand it, is struggling very much to get classroom teachers. And so they are pulling them from everywhere they can. So they are pulling them from the central system. So from the board offices, projects that they were working on, they're pulling teachers and putting them into classrooms. They are also pulling spec ed teachers or itinerant teachers that are working on reading programs, are going into classrooms now. They are just trying to get to the stage where each class has a teacher to start with. So you may find that if your child has reading needs, the one-on-one stops. You may find that the cert one-on-one time that you got, it really isn't happening. So what I'm kind of saying right now is it's really important that you work with the classroom teacher on the accommodations. Okay, and you reach out to other organizations like ours for other supports that we might be able to provide you with reading programs and math programs and things like that, social skills, to support your child while the school system is unable to cope. So I want to go on to what kind of things might be in place for virtual accommodations, and then we're going to move on to what happens if all of this is kind of not working. So again, any accommodations, and the classroom accommodations should be pretty much the same. So if you're in a classroom, if you've elected to go back to school, the accommodations that you receive should be pretty much the same as they were last year. As I say, they might not be getting the withdrawal support, but there shouldn't be much reason why everything else is different, other than, you know, there might not be the sharing of the computer. Some of the, you know, sensory materials might be off limits. You know, there'll be those kind of things, but it should all be there. In terms of virtual accommodations, one of the things about the pandemic is that I honestly believe that parents have a much better understanding of how their children learn after being stuck at home with them for at least the last 3 months of school last year. We have a real understanding of the struggles. We have a real understanding of their frustrations. We understand a little bit about what works and what doesn't work. And this is the time to be vocal. So this is the time to tell the teacher, yeah, we did this last year and this doesn't work. So I would recommend that we do this instead. So some of the things that, you know, a lot of teachers are using a lot more videos. If your child struggles with visual processing, they may need transcripts or extra time to do that. You know, again, for my daughter, she would watch the video, get nothing out of it. She would then, at the end of the class, come to me and say, I need to watch that video all over again. She would watch it, pause it for 2 minutes, pause it at 2 minutes, make some notes, go on for another 2 minutes, do the same thing. A 40-minute video that she was watching would take her 2.5 hours to make her notes on. Okay, so if she had a transcript, that would have been much better because she could just read it. Okay. Again, written assignments, and we talked about this, is that if your child struggles with written assignments, they need to be using text-to-speech, voice-to-text, be able to provide it in a video, be able to just do a Zoom call and tell the teacher about it. We really need to be proactive about the things that don't work, because it's hard enough for our children to show what they are learning in the virtual system without forcing them to use tools that aren't suited to them. So again, that moves into the alternative assessment models. The teacher doesn't need to stick to whatever format they've come up with for what the module or the project is. They can do it in any format they like. Again, a question that you know I would have is, if your child requires extra breaks, how is the teacher going to build that into the class for your child? It's a requirement. They can't sit there for however long. And chunking is like, okay, can we chunk this? Can you give them a little bit of the work and then let them come back to you? So these are some of the accommodations that it's really important to recognize the unique needs of your student. And as I said, you may have had the opportunity to observe them for more time than you would have done if they'd been in school, and have a better understanding of what works. And as I say, now you just need to let the teachers know. And I think most of them are actually pleased to hear, because the process of getting the IEPs and finding out the information is not working. You know, they don't even, half the time they didn't even know what classes they were teaching. So to be prepared, they really need you to help provide them with the information of what will work, what can help me help this child be successful. Because I'm sure that they will be assessed on how well they've done this. And if they've got lots of kids failing, it's not going to look good for them either. So those are some of the virtual accommodations. But what happens when things aren't working? Well, I want to make it very clear is that there is a real hierarchy, and you do need to follow it. So basically, if you're in the elementary system, you need to speak to the classroom teacher first, okay? Potentially the CERT. But you need to talk to them and say, you know, Johnny's really struggling here. And do it in a non-confrontational way. I know how hard this must be for you. right now, and I really want to support you. But I noticed at home he's not able to focus, and I think that's going to make life hard for you. So what can we do around this? And you probably have some ideas. If you're not getting the response that you want at that stage, you take it up to the vice principal or the principal. Okay. And they would then provide you with, hopefully, a bit more support. They might back the cert, in which case you would go higher up. So student services coordinator, principal in charge of special education, the person who's basically running the school's special education system. And you'd make your case to them. And then finally you go up to the superintendent. So, I've seen some people that jump from the classroom teacher to the director of education. It doesn't work. They will push you back down the line, and now they'll be really annoyed with you because it makes everybody look bad along the way. And it hasn't given them an opportunity to fix it, which is more the point. They haven't had an opportunity to resolve the issue for you. And so that isn't pleasant. In a secondary school, there's maybe a couple more steps. There's usually a department head of special education, but it's pretty much the same process. So the question was, what happens if your cert and your teacher you don't agree with them? And again, obviously every situation is different. It would depend on the specifics, but if it's a kind of accommodation and you don't agree that accommodation is going to work, you can scratch it out on the IEP. And you can then have a discussion with them and say, no, I don't think this is going to work. They might say, I'd like to try it. And I would recommend you say, okay, fine, let's try it for 2 weeks, 4 weeks. What are you expecting? And ask them, what are you expecting the progress to be? How will you judge whether this has been successful or not? And give them opportunity to outline to you exactly what they are going to achieve through the use of this accommodation. And then you go out of your meeting and you write it up and send them an email back saying, thank you very much for your meeting today. Glad we had the discussion. I understand that going forward, you will be trying X, Y, Z for 4 weeks with the aim that you are going to see this improvement in this period of time. I am concerned that it will not be successful, and at the end of those 4 weeks I would like to meet up with you to determine whether my suggestion is more appropriate. Put it in writing, and you give them a chance to prove you wrong, because maybe they do know something that we don't, unless you are absolutely adamant. And then maybe if it's something you're absolutely adamant about, then you take it at higher. But again, it comes down to letting them be the experts in what they're the experts in. And at some point it will become a judgment call of yours, and you know your child best. And if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. But perhaps you give them a certain period of time to try something. And then if it fails, they'll be more likely to take your view the next time. Does that answer that question, or are there any other questions related to what happens when things aren't working?
It looks like Shannon is happy with the answer. She's saying thank you for clarifying and putting in writing and putting timelines on it.
Great.
James and Ashley are asking, what is chunking?
Oh, okay, sorry. So chunking is where, so say we have a task. So the task is I want you to build a solar system. Okay. Chunking is, I want you today to paint the earth. And I'm using a really simple example here. And then when you've done that, you're going to come back and you're going to show me the earth. And then you're going to determine, based on the size, I want you to do Jupiter next. Should Jupiter be bigger or smaller? So you do one part at a time, and then you go to the next task and you say, okay, now we have the first part. We're going to build on that, but we don't overwhelm them with the whole project in one go. So, you know, an example of this is, you know, in the high school system, when we were in COVID, the end of last year, the high school kids would get their work for the week at the beginning on a Monday. And I know it was completely overwhelming for a lot of them. Whereas other teachers would provide, we're going to do this today. And then the next day, we're going to do this today. If your child can't, it's particularly helpful if there's executive functioning issues, where your child is struggling to break the project down or can't visualize it, then effectively what you're doing is you're teaching them how to break it down. You're teaching them that each task is made up of little tasks, and that we can look at each little task and we can do that. And we can be successful at that, and then we can move on to the next one. And we don't have to worry about the whole thing all in one go. So it kind of helps with anxiety. It reduces overwhelm. It helps with focus because they don't have 17 steps on a piece of paper to look at. It may help with processing. There's a whole range of things. So it's a very common accommodation where the teachers would break down and not give the child all the information of the task in one go.
Okay, great. So we're nearing the end. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of the general questions that have come in.
Yeah.
So Kristen has asked, how difficult will it be to initiate IEPs this year? My child was diagnosed with ADHD in March.
It should be no different. Okay, so again, I've been told by the superintendents that IEPs will be developed exactly as they would have been. They're going to be a week late because the school system started late. But for ADHD, you won't get an IPRC. It's not an exceptionality under those categories. So it will be a school-based IEP. And therefore, all you need to have is getting the cert, the principal, the classroom teacher, and yourself around the table, hopefully maybe with the child, depending on their age, and coming up with some strategies of what's going to work, and they can put that in place. They generally take about 30 days to develop them. But you know, it can be done faster. But I would kind of, if you've made them aware of it already, they may already be working on it and it may be coming out in a couple of weeks' time.
Great, thank you. So the next question may have been addressed, but I'll repeat it again. Chris asks, during COVID, how do you ensure the school is following the IEP? The classes are blended in person, online, and the IEP speaks to in-class accommodations only because it was established before COVID.
Yes. So you are going to get, in 2 weeks' time, the new IEP. So that should have been developed now based on the fact that if you're in the virtual school, there may need to be different accommodations. Again, if I were you and you think that there are things on that IEP that are not working in a virtual setting, I would take a photocopy of it right now. I would mark it up and I would send it into the school, whoever the cert is, and they should have reached out and introduced themselves, or you can find out who the cert is, and send it to them and say, I know you're developing the IEPs to help you in that process. Here's some thoughts and observations that I made last year about what worked and didn't work, and I think it will be helpful going forward. because you're the only one that will have seen what was working and what was not working. I mean, the teacher might have done, but they were probably so focused on trying to keep the world running at that stage that they really weren't looking out for those things. So I would preempt it, send it in with what you want to see on it.
Fantastic. So one last question for tonight's session. It's by Christine. She asks, when do IPRC reviews happen and why?
So an IPRC will happen, they happen throughout the year. I think they're once a month. They happen if there is a request for one. So either the school will request one or the parent can request one. And so that will start the process of an IPRC. If you want to have a review of what has already been done in the IPRC, so if you have an exceptionality statement and you want it reanalyzed, and maybe you've got more data or there's been a change or something like that, or you want to change the placement, you could either talk to the principal or you can write to the principal. If you put it in writing, they have to give you one. So you can request an IPRC review. I can't remember. There is always an IPRC review every year. But what often happens is that they don't necessarily, they say, oh, there's no change, you don't need to go. Do you waive it? And you can say, no, I don't waive it, I'd like to go. And you can also write to the principal and say, I would like a review. So that you can have, you can have them at any time. If you want to review the, either the statement of exceptionality or the placement that your child is in.
Perfect, thank you. So it seems like there are no more questions in the chat. So at this point, I'm just going to say thank you to Allison for that wonderful presentation. I think if there's one thing to take away is to don't hold back when it comes to your advocating for your child and their IEPs. So thank you, Allison. And thank you, all of you, for attending. We hope that you learned something today and you have lots to take back with you when you do start the IEP process. This whole presentation, like we've mentioned at the beginning, will be available on our website if you want to share it or if you want to rewatch it. And at this point, if you have any comments, please leave them in the chat, and good night.
Great, thank you very much. Take care.